you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include waiting, weighted, and weighty.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people? Wrong! You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Cost-free! I had one of the worst restaurant experiences in my life this week, and the thing that redeemed it was that it wasn't even the worst thing for me. It was really the worst thing for the restaurant. I went to this barbecue place for lunch. I was going to treat myself, and I walk in, I go to the restaurant, I get there like at 12:05. 12:05. The doors are locked. There's a big sign above the restaurant that says now open, which is weird because it's been open for a while. It says now open. I try the door, it's locked. I'm like, what is going on? I guess the sign's a lie or something. And then as I'm starting to walk away, I'm trying to figure out like what's going on with this restaurant because I know it's open. I know it's still operating. A guy comes to the door and unlocks it, and there's two people kind of waiting outside. He's like, hey, are you here for the catering? Yes, we're here for that. And then to me, I tell him, hey, I was just going to eat in. And he's like, okay, give us just a few minutes. So I give it a few minutes. I go inside. They've got this big catering order that they're trying to fulfill. They didn't know about it until late. There's only 2 guys working. They're trying to get this huge order for 16 people out the door. And you know, I just sit and I wait, and eventually they're like, okay, how can we help you? And like things on the menu are covered up. There's usually chips like all in the front for you, to choose your own. None of those are there. I say, I'll have a brisket sandwich, and he starts making the brisket sandwich for me, and then he says, okay, what kind of sides do you want? And I say beans. And he's like, oh, the beans aren't ready. They're going to be like 6 minutes. No beans. Okay. What do you have? And he's like, I've got coleslaw and potato salad. And I don't eat mayonnaise. And so I'm like, I'll just have the sandwich. And I'll get the sandwich and a drink. And he's like, oh, the soda machine, there's like water and Mellow Yellow. Maybe Diet Coke. And I'm like, okay, I'll just get a water then. And then the other guy, he's the owner. He's like, you know what? This order's free. This is on us. So they just hand me the food. They don't ring it up or anything. They just hand me the food. Everything's missing from this restaurant. And I can tell that they're just having a very, very bad day. Like, I don't know. Oh, I forgot. I had asked for some other, I didn't want the brisket sandwich. I wanted something else, and they didn't have it. Like, they were out of everything. I don't know what's happening at this place, but they were having a hard time. And I got my food for free. That was great that I got this free sandwich, but I would have preferred to pay. I would have preferred to pay money to get the things I wanted than to get this sandwich for free and have such a... Oh, they had to turn the lights on for me so I could sit there. I wouldn't sit there in the dark. Like whatever you can imagine a bad day for a restaurant was, that's what's happening to these 2 guys who are working in this restaurant. And I really hope that things improve for them because that's just a very bad day at work. And I bring this up because it was free for me. And I don't prefer free. I would prefer to pay, but there's this guy in Spain. He's figured out how to get free meals. He's 50, which is not that old, but he's got this scheme where he goes into restaurants, and then when it's time for him to pay, he pretends to have a heart attack. And he makes a big scene. He's falling on the ground. My heart. He's dying kind of thing. And then the people at the restaurant feel so bad because he's dying that they don't charge him, and he leaves the restaurant. Somehow he gets up, or an ambulance comes for him. I hope he's not taking ambulance rides. But it's become such a thing in this town that all the restaurants know his gimmick. They know who he is. They know this happens. And so he goes into this restaurant and he has a heart attack. And they, instead of calling an ambulance, they call the police. And the man gets arrested. And he's done this like over 20 times. And like, dude, like for lunch, like it's not that much money. Like it can't be worth it, right? I guess for some people it is. They really love running the scam. They really feel like they're getting away with something, but not me. Like I'll no doubt I'll take a free lunch, but I'm not going to that extent. Issue number 2, weightless. There's this new drug. It's called Ozempic. Ozempic? Ozempic. I'm pretty sure it's Ozempic. I'm not stopping this recording to go find out. I'm like 80 to 30% sure it's Ozempic. It's this weight loss drug, and how it works is it fools your brain. It produces this hormone that your brain gets when you're full. And so this drug, you take this drug and this hormone is produced in you, and so you think you're full all the time. You feel like you don't need to eat. You're satiated. And you know, you have that feeling when you've eaten so much, you're like, oh no, I could not eat anything more. Like food starts to look disgusting to you for just a little bit, right? Eventually you feel better and you're like, yeah, I'll go back for that pie. But this drug, it makes you feel like that all the time. And people, when they take it, they lose like 5 pounds a month. And their cravings go away. And this is kind of cool, right? Like, who doesn't want to see obese people lose weight? And there's this cool new drugs that you know, the side effects are relatively minor and don't show up for all that many people. And here's the deal with the drug. It's not just like taking a pill. It's not something all of us are going to want to do. You have to get this injection pen, and you have to stick a needle into your belly and hold it there for like 6 seconds once a week. Stick a needle into your belly, or your thigh if you prefer, for 6 seconds once a week. And I'm like, you know, I don't need to lose that much weight. But for some people, you know, if they've got diabetes and they've already got to prick their finger for the blood and they've got to give themselves injections, this seems like it's no loss for them, right? Like it's kind of an easy transfer. And the other problem with the drug is that once you start taking it, all those cravings return. It like that feeling of being full is gone and you're ready to belly up to the bar once again. So if you start taking it, you're kind of going to be taking it for the rest of your life. And what's interesting about this drug is that it's showing so much potential that people are starting to speculate about how this is going to affect the stock market. Like, there's a ton of money being spent on people with health problems due to obesity. A ton of money. Like, kidney dialysis and all these sorts of things. Diabetic medication. Heart attacks. All these kinds of things that happen to people who are obese. They can be greatly reduced by this drug. And so the money is going to kind of fall out of all those businesses that rely on people being extremely overweight and having problems with them. And it's going to transfer into companies who can make this drug. In addition, fast food companies may take a big hit. You know, they've got cheap, easy to eat food that's just right there, and people aren't going to be so interested anymore if they've got this drug. The other issue with the drug is that I don't think that it's been approved for weight loss right yet. It's like a secondary use, and it hasn't been approved by the FDA to help people to lose weight. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, and maybe eventually I'll learn how to say Ozempic.
Wrong!
Hey, it's time. What are the rules?
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
This is something that's been bothering me for like years, like decades. So bothered. Going to Starbucks, Do you want a tall, a venti, or a grande? No, I don't want a tall or a venti or a grande. I want a small, medium, or large. I looked it up. The Italian word for small isn't tall. In fact, tall isn't the word for small in any language at all. What is it? What are you doing, Starbucks? Tall. Give me a tall. No, it's a small. It's not a tall. I'm not doing it. I go to Starbucks, I say small. I say medium, I say large. In fact, this is the reason why I prefer Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf over Starbucks. Because they're not making everybody feel like they're fancy with their little pinky out asking for a venti. Stop it. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@therewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, therewrongpodcast.com, and help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
This is episode 97. During episode 95, I explained that you should never take your shoes off on an airplane. And I had a listener who was listening to my podcast on an airplane with his shoes off when he heard me say that. And inexplicably, he decided to send me a photo of his shoeless feet on the airplane while listening to the podcast. Like, I'm going on a rant on this very behavior, and he's showing off. Like, I don't want to say his name because this is just shameless. He apparently lacks shame, and he lacks common decency. But Drew, you need to stop it. Issue number 3. Ceasefire. About 2 weeks ago, Hamas enacted a terrorist attack against Israel. It is awful. The descriptions are awful. The Israeli government has started to release videos because they want people to really see what's happened. And I've decided not, for the most part, not to watch those videos because I'd like to sleep at night. I'll take their word for it. And as a very minor note, very, very minor in the scope of all of this, what's been nice to see is that the extreme radical left has a lot of stupid things to say. Like, for the last several years, the radical right has really cornered the market on stupid things to say and believe. And they haven't left a lot of space for the radical left to go for it. And very, very minor note, like, oh good, the radical left is dumb. Like, because there are just a lot of dumb people saying a lot of stupid things in response to a terrorist attack. And the problem that both the right and the left have is tolerating the stupid people on their own side and letting them go, choosing not to say, hey, stop it, that's not cool. Go off on your own somewhere and say those sorts of things. And the elite universities are not immune to this. And it's been funny to watch the elite universities say, oh, no, we believe in academic freedom. We believe in free expression. We really, really do. We need to allow people to say things that we disagree with, even when they're terrible. And I agree with that. But funny timing to all of a sudden decide that you agree with freedom of expression and allowing people to say really dumb, horrible things on campus. Because there's been a lot of right-wing people who want to say just even moderately conservative things that you don't want them to say. Like, yeah, you're going to let these people protest in favor of terrorism, but you won't allow somebody like Jordan Peterson to come speak at your university. Like, have a little bit of self-awareness when you're making these benevolent gestures to the concept of free speech. Okay, I want to talk about how we got here, what I think of the situation in general, and just to start, I want to give you my priors, just so you know where I'm coming from. So if I'm saying something you disagree with, I'm letting you know why I'm saying something you disagree with. I'm owning my bias in this. And you can do without whatever you will as I talk about the current news. So first off, I'm a Christian. I'm unapologetically a Christian. I love being a Christian. I hope all of you become Christians someday. My spiritual heritage comes from Israel and from the Jewish people. As the cliche goes, my boss is a Jewish carpenter. Israel means a lot to me spiritually. There is some ambiguity within Christianity if the blessings that God gave to Abraham and his descendants belong to the Christian church or if they belong to the literal descendants of Abraham. I side with the idea that the blessings that went to Abraham and his descendants are no longer with the literal descendants of Abraham, but they actually belong to the Christian church. Other people might disagree with that, but there's good reasons for both sides. But my thoughts are that Abraham's blessings belong to the Christian church now, not to the Hebrew people. Either way, whatever side you take in that theological debate, I don't think the modern nation state of Israel has anything to do with the blessings due to Abraham and his descendants. The modern nation state of Israel is something different than the Hebrew people. It's a government put in place to represent Jewish interest, but it is not Judaism. It is not the Hebrew people. There are more Jews living outside of Israel than there are in Israel. So if Abraham's blessings go to the Jews, they're all over the place. They're not just in Israel. And what any Jew does in Brooklyn isn't any more blessed than what a Jew does in Jerusalem. That's my thinking on it. The nation of Israel does not get a moral pass for being God's favorite, even if they were God's favorite. Even if the current nation state of Israel was God's favorite, they would not get a moral pass. The Bible is very clear about that. Most of the Old Testament is about Israel. You've really messed up this time. You're going to get it for being so messed up. So if it could happen in the Old Testament, no doubt it could happen today. That God would be disturbed, that they would mess up and God would be disturbed about it and give them very, very serious consequences for the behavior. So I intellectually, in my gut, what I want to be is I want to be pro-Palestinian, I want to be pro-Israeli, and I want to be pro-peace. I want peace to flourish however it can. Also, I'm not a pacifist. I believe in personal pacifism. I don't believe I should avenge myself in any way, but I believe governments have the role assigned to them by God to protect people's freedom, to protect justice, to keep people safe from bad actors. That there are sinful, evil people in the world, and the government's job is to make sure we are safe from them. So how did we get here? What's the story of this conflict? And I'm going to start in the Bible. Abraham, he's living in what is current-day Iraq. God tells him to move to Israel. So he moves, he and all of his possessions and all of his family, and he gets to the Promised Land. And from there, he has two sons. One of them gets the blessing of being God's favorite people, and the other, Ishmael, the son from his half-wife, his descendants become the Arab people. Isaac, the favorite son, he has two sons himself. Jacob eventually gets the blessing from Isaac, and he and his 12 sons and all of their families, they eventually move out of Israel, out of the current land of Israel, into Egypt. And they live there for 400 years. Then Moses takes them back to the promised land, and Joshua leads them back into the land, and the Hebrew people, they either kill or drive away or integrate everyone who was there. So whoever's land it was, they're all gone. Eventually, the Israeli people, they form the Israeli nation, and after King Solomon, there's a civil war. They break into two different nations, Israel and Judah. 10 tribes make up the nation of Israel, 2 tribes make up the nation of Judah. Hundreds of years later, Assyria comes and they take away, they invade Israel, and they take all of the people away. Very few people are left. The 10 tribes are scattered. That leaves the 2 tribes in Judah. Later, Babylon comes in and they take over Judah. And the people in Judah are the intellectuals, the elite, anybody who's rich. They're hauled out of Judah and they're taken to Babylon. Later, Persia takes over Babylon, and the Persians send back the Jews. They send the people of Judah, they send them back into the land. And they're called Jews because they're not from the nation of Israel. They're the people of Judah, so that's why we call them Jews now. And the Jews start to rebuild Judea, and eventually Greece comes in, conquers them, and then Rome comes in and conquers them. And around 70 AD, the Romans have had enough of the Jewish people. They have insurrectionists, they're always fighting against the Romans, and the Romans just say enough. And they destroy Jerusalem, and they take the Jewish people out of Judea, and they make them slaves throughout Europe. They scatter them. And the Romans are so serious about eliminating this Jewish nuisance that they rename Judea Palestine. That's why it's called Palestine today. Later on, the Roman Empire falls apart, the Crusades happen, Islam becomes a major religion, and they've got their own sights on Jerusalem and the land, and the Arabs, the Muslim Arabs, come into Palestine and they take it over. And they rule it for hundreds of years. Eventually, what's left of all of those kingdoms and whoever took over that land is the Ottoman Empire, which we now know as Turkey. Or Turkey is not the Ottoman Empire, but Turkey is what's left of the Ottoman Empire. And World War I happens, the Ottoman Empire falls apart. And Britain takes over that land, takes over much of the land in the Middle East that the Ottomans controlled. And Britain says, hey, you know what? There's a problem with all the Jews in Europe. They don't have a homeland, and they are being persecuted and abused, and maybe we should give them their own land. And so under British rule, Jews are invited from wherever they are in Europe to come to Palestine to start settling there by invitation. And when they do this, the Arabs who live there don't like it. And they start fighting the Jews, and the Jews start fighting back. And the British get involved because they don't like people fighting, and eventually the Arabs and the Jews start fighting the British too. World War II happens, and we all know what happens to the Jews during World War II, the Holocaust. And Britain decides they want out of this Palestinian territory. They don't want to rule it anymore. It's a headache to them. They say, hey, let's just make it the nation of Israel. And they make this proposal to the UN. The UN says, yes, In 1948, the nation of Israel can exist. And the UN, the United Nations, also says, hey, there should be this Palestinian country as well. So they divide up lines and they say, these parts of the area, that's Israel. These parts of the area, that can be Palestine. And the Palestinian people reject the agreement. The Israeli people say, yes, we want it. So Israel is recognized by the UN, and there is no government officially recognized or established with control in the area for the Palestinian people. So as things go on, lots of war happens. Basically, I heard somebody say that the Israeli government is an army that has a civilian government attached to it. And because of all of the outside and internal threats to it, the military just has to be super strong. And the various Arab nations that are surrounding Israel, they want to eliminate it. They don't want the Jews there at all. There's this phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The idea is, hey, all the Jews are gone from the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. That's all their territory. The Jews are not welcome there. So various Arab nations invade. Egypt at some point invades, and every time somebody attacks Israel, Israel gains more ground. They expand their own territory. They expanded. When it started off, they didn't have any portion of Jerusalem. After the various wars, they start to take over parts of Jerusalem, which is important to them historically. It's also important to the Arabs historically. And at one point, Egypt invades and Israel takes land all the way through the Sinai Peninsula, all the way to the Suez Canal. And eventually Israel, on their own accord, give back much of that land back to Egypt. But there is this strip in the southwestern part of Israel called the Gaza Strip, and they maintain control of that. And throughout the decades, there's various Palestinian groups that are formed, both internally in Israel and externally outside of Israel. There's these groups that want to agitate against Israel on behalf of the Palestinian people. And Israel is attacked by these groups. You can call them freedom fighters or you can call them terrorists. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference, but a lot of what they're doing is terrorism. And a lot of what they're doing is sponsored by the Arab nations that surround Israel. Eventually, Bill Clinton sits down with Yasser Arafat. He's the Palestinian leader. And he sits down with Israeli Prime Minister Barak Ehud. And Clinton pushes them to compromise. Like, hey, this fighting has to stop. Let's form two nations, a two-state solution where you recognize each other's right to exist, and then you can move on. You can govern yourself. You'll know what your borders are, and the Israeli Prime Minister gives in a lot. And the agreement comes before Yasser Arafat, and Arafat says, no, can't do it. My people won't accept it. I can't accept it. It's not going to happen. So then terrorist attacks start happening to make sure that this agreement doesn't happen, and a conservative prime minister comes in, Ariel Sharon. And in 2005, Ariel Sharon, he's just like, enough with it. Like, okay, we're going to cordon off these Palestinian sections of our land, and we're going to put walls and fences up, and if Jews are in those sections right now, we're going to forcibly remove them. I don't care if you're in your home. I don't care if you have a farm. You're leaving now. We're moving you out. So they move all the Jews out of the Palestinian sections, and they start putting up walls. And they say, you know what, Palestinians, go for it. You don't recognize our right to exist. That's fine. These are your areas. You rule them however you want. You elect your own governments. And in the southwestern strip called the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians elect this group known as Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's like electing Al-Qaeda. It's not electing the Taliban, it's electing Al-Qaeda. Hamas exists to make sure that Israel does not exist. They want to kill Jews. That's what they want. And that is who is elected to rule the Gaza Strip. And Hamas is funded by the Iranians and the other Muslim states. And they don't put this money into the infrastructure of the Palestinian territories. There is so much oil money among the Muslim nations that they could just give cash to all the Palestinian people and make them very, very comfortable. Instead, this money is funneled into fighting the Israeli government. The other thing about the Arab nations is that they could accept refugees and immigrants from the Palestinian territories, but they don't. And there's 3 reasons why they don't accept these refugees. The first is those people live in their own homes. They've been living there for thousands of years, some of them. Their families go back a very long way. Not all the way back to Abraham, but a very long time. And it's hard to decide, hey, when is this your land and when is it not? And people are there. They have their lives. They shouldn't have to move. Second reason that they don't accept refugees or encourage immigration out of the Palestinian territories is that they like that Israel has to deal with this problem. The Palestinian people are being used by the Arab nations and the Muslim nations as a tack under Israel's foot. They're there to agitate. They like that they're being agitated. They like that Israel has this constant threat. The third reason is that these countries surrounding Israel don't want to accept terrorists into their own countries because they're fundamentalist. And fundamentalists aren't content to just fight against their enemies. They also fight against the people who don't fight the way they want to fight. And let's just say Egypt doesn't want these Hamas terrorists coming into Egypt and then firing rockets into Israel from Egypt, because then they would have a problem with Israel. Israel would be like, hey, if you're not going to take care of this problem, we are. And so Israel would be crossing the border to kill the terrorists inside Egypt, and Egypt doesn't want that. So those are the 3 reasons why immigration is not encouraged and why the border is just as strong between Egypt and the Gaza Strip as it is between Israel and the Gaza Strip. So what does Hamas want? Why did Hamas go into Israel and kill 1,200 civilians? Why did they go in and behead babies? They did it because they want to provoke Israel. They want Israel to respond. Every nation on earth would respond to this sort of attack. You go into any country and you kill babies, the country is going to demand action of their government, right? The government is going to act. They're going to say, hey, no, that's not cool. You're not allowed to do that. We're going to make sure that never happens again. Hamas knows that Israel has to respond. They did this. Their targets were intentional. They wanted to do something that makes Israel act. And they know that when Israel acts, Palestinians will be killed. Innocent Palestinians will be killed. Hamas wants Israel to kill innocent Palestinians because when Palestinians are killed, then the neighboring Muslims will get upset that the Jews are killing Muslims. And their hope is that seeing images of Jews killing Muslims will cause the Muslims to say, well, enough of that, we have to respond to Israel. And then Israel be wiped out by their Muslim neighbors. That's what Hamas wants. That's what they're hoping for. They know that they can't go on making these kind of intrusions into the country and eventually wipe out, 9 million people, killing them 1,000 people at a time. They know that's not realistic. That's not what's going to get their goals done. It's going to be getting the other Muslim countries to say, yeah, we agree with you, Hamas. Israel needs to be wiped out. And, there are people who are immediately after this terrorist act, they're like, there needs to be a ceasefire. We've got to have a ceasefire. Hey, come on, Israel, we got to have a ceasefire. The thing is, There was a ceasefire. Hamas violated the ceasefire. Like, it's just kind of silly to say, hey, only one side needs to obey the ceasefire. The other side isn't going to obey the ceasefire. That's okay. You responsible democratic nation, you need to respect the ceasefire at all times. No, the ceasefire is over. It'd be great for a ceasefire to return, but one side clearly doesn't want it. It would have remained. Israel wouldn't launch attacks on the Gaza Strip unprovoked. They weren't doing that. It wasn't in their interest to do that. Hamas does not want to negotiate with Israel. They just want them dead. Like, if you sat them down together and the Israeli government said to Hamas, what do you want? How can we help you? What do you want? Hamas would say, I want you dead. Go die. Go die in a hole. That's all they want. There's nothing they can give them other than their death, and they're not willing to give them their death. Israel has a right to exist. So the other thing about Hamas is that they do not want the Palestinian people to leave Gaza. There's two very good reasons for this. The one is the one I mentioned. They want Palestinian civilians to die at the hands of the Israeli government. That's their goal. They want that to happen. The other reason is if the civilians all left and left nothing but the militants, the terrorists, well then Israel would just flatten the whole land, right? It'd be very easy to kill everybody who remains if all of the innocent people leave. So the Hamas needs innocent people there to serve as a buffer and as protection because the Israelis don't actually want to kill civilians. It's not their goal to kill civilians. The other thing with Hamas is that they intentionally use civilian targets to launch attacks against Israel. They store military weapons in schools, in mosques, in hospitals. And the rules of warfare are clear on this account. You are not allowed to target a hospital or a school or any sort of mosque or church. It's very clear. But if you are fighting against somebody and you go into a school and start shooting at somebody from a school, that building is no longer a school. It is now a military target. And the other side has a right to defend themselves against you while you fire from inside that hospital or school. So if you go into a hospital and start firing against your enemy, you're the one who's put the people in the hospital at risk. You chose to make that happen. So I heard this woman talking on another podcast, and somebody was talking about, all the things that Israel shouldn't do. They really need to restrain themselves, and they really need to make sure this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen. And she just kind of got fed up, and she says, what is Israel allowed to do? And he started saying, well, they shouldn't do this or they shouldn't do that. And he's like, I know what they shouldn't do. I agree, they shouldn't do those things. What are they allowed to do? What should they do? How should they handle this problem? What's their action step? What's okay with you that they do? And he couldn't answer the question. And the question is brilliant in its simplicity. How are you supposed to live with somebody who wants you dead? What are you allowed to do in that situation? Somebody is intent on you dying. What are you allowed to do? Now, there's something you need to know about Israel. There are Arabs living inside Israel who have citizenship. It's not an apartheid nation. Muslims and Christians and Jews and secularists, they all are allowed to live inside Israel. Israel is not perfect by any means. But it is not apartheid. They don't intentionally have this system set up to destroy Muslims and to kill Muslims. They're doing their best to live in peace. And if the Muslim agitators were willing to live in peace, I'm pretty sure peace would exist. There's kind of this cliche. If the Palestinians put down their guns, there would be no war. If the Israelis put down their guns, there would be no Israel. For sure, Israel has overreacted in the past. For sure, they have made mistakes. For sure, they have hurt and killed people they shouldn't have. Israel is not 100% innocent. Not by any means. They are not 100% innocent. But there is no moral equivalence between Hamas and the Israeli government. Hamas has become ISIS. And the only way peace was restored to Iraq and Syria was when ISIS was eliminated, when they were destroyed. And if Hamas is going to be ISIS, the only way forward is for Hamas to be destroyed. Now, what complicates this is that Palestinians do have some responsibility. Hamas is not Palestinian, and Palestinians are not Hamas. But the Palestinians bear some responsibility for Hamas. They've elected them to govern them in the Gaza Strip. They've allowed them to exist. Unfortunately, because they've allowed them to exist and they've allowed them to represent them, that will have consequences on Palestinians. And I hate that civilians will die. Hamas has unfortunately created a situation that is incredibly difficult to escape. There's no way to do this one person at a time. And I have no idea how to resolve the issue. No clue. Anybody who says they know exactly what should happen, stop listening to them. Because they don't know. They don't know. Somebody's going to have to develop a plan, and it's going to be a bad plan. Whatever it is, it's not going to work the way they hope. Urban warfare is awful. It's the worst kind of warfare. It's awful for everybody. Whatever stands in Gaza may not stand for long. There are 2 million people there. I don't know how to protect them. What I hope will happen is that Egypt and Syria and the other Muslim nations will open their borders and allow refugees to flee. People who don't want to be there will be allowed to leave. And, you know, if I was heading up the U.S. government or the United Nations or any other government, I'd say, what kind of money do you need to make this happen, to allow these refugees to come in? It needs to happen. That's the best way for civilians to become safe. Because Hamas isn't going to walk out into the open. They're not going to walk out away from the civilians on their own. They're intentionally embedding themselves with them. The only way out is for the civilians to leave. Like, the only way to clear the area. And the other thing that has to happen diplomatically is that the Muslim nations need to be encouraged to stay out of it. They're all threatening right now. They're telling Israel they can't respond. I don't know how you can tell Israel that they can't respond. The Muslim nations need to be told, hey, you need to stay out of it. There's consequences if you don't stay out of it. You will make things worse if you step into it. You'll be doing what Hamas wants you to do if you step into it. The third thing is Qatar needs to expel the Hamas leadership. There's a small Muslim country called Qatar. They're kind of like the Cayman Islands of the Muslim world. They do a lot of banking, and the Hamas leadership doesn't live inside Gaza. They live hundreds of miles away in Qatar in luxury apartments, and Qatar needs to kick them out. Send them back to Gaza. Like, they are cowards who are making themselves rich and fat off the Palestinian people. And I don't know how to get Qatar to do that, but gosh, I won't be surprised if the Israelis send people into Qatar to kill some Hamas leadership. Like, if Qatar isn't willing, Israel will invite themselves. That's my prediction on it, and I hope Qatar decides to be agents of peace. Now, through this all, there's going to be this huge temptation for people on both sides to use dehumanizing language. I've already heard people say it. Hey, Hamas, these are not people, these are animals. This is the way animals act. And no, that's wrong. Hamas are people. They are doing exactly what people do. As terrible as these actions are, we have to we have to reckon with the fact that this is what people do. This is how humans behave. We need to maintain their humanity and recognize their evil, the evilness within us, and recognize that they are people. And when we start using dehumanizing language and we start saying that they aren't people, that's when things always go bad. That things always go from bad to worse. And as bad as things are, or as bad as someone else has already acted, you don't want to make them worse. You want to make sure that everybody on both sides is recognized as someone who is created in the image of God and who is capable of peace and grace and mercy. And outside of prayer, I don't know how it will come about, but God, please send peace into this situation. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. Let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.